Rapid Ratings releasing a new report surveying executives and experts about the global supply chain in 2025. And according to the report, a majority thinks supply chain disruptions will get worse before they get better.
Did you know that in the last quarter of 2024, food prices surged 14% worldwide? But that's just the beginning. New reports warn that supply chain disruptions, extreme weather, and economic instability could make 2025 even worse. Right now, you might feel like you're in control. Your fridge is stocked, your pantry looks fine. But what if I told you that some of the most essential grocery staples are already disappearing? Prices are rising faster than ever, and some major retailers are already limiting purchases on key items. According to the latest Global Food Security Report, over 140 grocery items are at risk of shortages. But these 30 are the ones you need to act on right now. If you don't stock up soon, you could be paying double by summer. Now, I don't just pull these numbers out of thin air. I've spent weeks analyzing price trends, digging into supply chain reports, and talking to food industry insiders. What I found? Shocking. So stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly what to buy, how to store it, and why waiting could cost you big. And before we get to number one, let me ask you, when was the last time you checked the price of cooking oil? What I'm about to reveal might make you rethink your entire grocery budget. Let's get started. First up, powdered milk and shelf-stable dairy. Now, listen to this. Fresh milk prices jumped 18% in late 2024, and experts are predicting another surge by summer 2025 due to feed shortages and rising transportation costs. But here's the real issue. When supply chains break, fresh dairy is one of the first things to disappear. That's why powdered milk is a stockpile must-have. A single 5-pound bag can provide gallons of milk and stays fresh for up to 25 years if stored properly. Yes, 25 years. And here's what most people don't know. Modern powdered milk isn't that chalky mess from the past. The new vacuum-sealed packages use nitrogen flushing technology, which locks in freshness way longer than before. But don't just stop at powdered milk. Evaporated milk and shelf-stable almond or oat milk are great backups. Pro tip: look for unsweetened versions so you can use them for both sweet and savory recipes. Now, here's a little warning. During the last dairy shortage, prices on these skyrocketed, and stores started limiting purchases. If you wait until shelves start clearing out, it's already too late. Here's your action plan. Grab at least 6 cans of evaporated milk and a couple of large bags of powdered milk per person in your household. Store them in a cool, dark place. High heat can ruin the shelf life. Trust me, this is one of those stockpile essentials that saves you in a crisis. Now let's talk about peanut butter and nut butters. Before you scroll past this, you need to hear this. Thanks to poor harvests in key peanut growing regions, we're looking at shortages by mid-2025. But here's what most people don't realize. Natural peanut butter without added oils lasts longer than the processed kind. One 16-ounce jar of peanut butter packs over 3,000 calories, making it one of the most calorie-dense survival foods out there. And if you store it upside down, it prevents oil separation, keeping it fresh for over 2 years. But here's a shocker. Almond and cashew butters are already being hit with price hikes. In fact, California's almond production is down 60% due to droughts. That means alternative nut butters? They're going to be ridiculously expensive soon. Here's your move. Buy in bulk now while prices are stable. Stockpile at least 4 jars per person. That's about a year's worth of spreads and protein boosts. And don't forget to store them in a cool, dark place. Bonus tip: if you see peanut powder on sale, grab it. It lasts longer and takes up way less space. Next up, canned meats. And listen, this isn't just about survival food. The poultry industry is still reeling from last year's bird flu outbreak, and beef prices are set to jump another 15% due to feed shortages. That's why canned chicken, tuna, and salmon need to be in your stockpile. They last up to 5 years, require 0 refrigeration, and pack the protein you need. And here's a surprising fact. Not all canned meats are created equal. Look for tuna packed in water, not oil, for longer shelf life and lower mercury levels. And here's the kicker. Major retailers have already started limiting canned meat purchases. Some stores are even seeing shortages on premium brands. If you wait until summer, you'll be stuck paying nearly double. Here's the action plan. Get at least 12 cans of canned meat per person. And don't sleep on Spam, corned beef, or even freeze-dried meat if you can find it. Store them in a cool, dry space and rotate them every year. Trust me, this is one stockpile category that you'll be grateful for later. Now, let's get into something that could disappear faster than you think. Shelf-stable coffee and tea. You might think, hey, I'll just pick up a bag when I need it. But here's the brutal truth. Brazil, which supplies 40% of the world's coffee, just had its worst frost in 27 years. That means global coffee production is at a 10-year low, and price hikes are already happening. Retailers are quietly raising prices while shrinking bag sizes. And tea? Same problem. China and India are seeing major climate issues impacting tea leaf production. Now, here's the trick. Whole coffee beans last way longer than pre-ground coffee. If you store them in vacuum-sealed bags or airtight containers in the freezer, they'll stay fresh for up to 2 years. And if you really want a backup, instant coffee has a nearly indefinite shelf life. Tea drinkers? Stock up on loose-leaf tea instead of tea bags. It stays fresh longer and you can control the strength. And here's a pro tip from a master roaster. If you freeze coffee, divide it into small portions and only thaw what you need. Refreezing destroys the flavor. Your move? Get at least 3 to 6 months worth of coffee or tea now. Prices are only going up, and by mid-2025, you might not even recognize the price tags. Finally, let's talk about one of the most overlooked stockpile items, honey and maple syrup. You might not think much about these, but listen. Bee populations are crashing, and honey production is plummeting. Prices are already up 20%, and it's only getting worse. But here's why this matters. Honey lasts forever. I'm talking literally thousands of years. Archaeologists have found 30,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs, and it was still edible. That's how powerful this stuff is. But here's something you probably don't know. Most store-bought honey is cut with cheap syrups. If you want the real deal, look for raw, unfiltered honey. And for storage? Glass jars are your best bet. Plastic bottles let in moisture over time, which can ruin the texture. And maple syrup? Canada's production is way down, and the last time this happened, prices nearly tripled. If you see it on sale, grab a few extra bottles now. Here's your plan. At least 2 jars of raw honey per person and a couple of bottles of pure maple syrup. Store them in a dark, cool space, and you'll have a natural sweetener that will never go bad. Quick reality check before we move on. You don't have to buy all of this at once. Start with what you use most, but do not wait too long. Prices are climbing, and once stock runs low, you'll be stuck paying a premium. Now, what's coming up next? One everyday item that's already being rationed in some stores, and it might just be the most critical thing to have in your stockpile. Let's get into it. Let's talk about vinegar, and trust me, this is one of the most underrated stockpile essentials. You might think of it as just a cooking ingredient, but vinegar is so much more. It's a natural preservative, a powerful cleaning agent, and even a first aid essential. And here's why you need to act now. The demand for vinegar has skyrocketed in the last year, and it's not slowing down. Since 2024, there's been a 200% increase in home pickling and food preservation. People are waking up to the fact that fresh food isn't always guaranteed, and vinegar is a key ingredient for extending shelf life. But it's not just about food. With cleaning supply costs soaring, more households are switching to DIY cleaning solutions. That means vinegar isn't just sitting in the condiment aisle anymore, it's flying off the shelves in the cleaning section too. Here's what most people don't realize. Not all vinegars are created equal. White vinegar is your all-purpose staple, perfect for preserving food, disinfecting surfaces, and even deodorizing fabrics. Apple cider vinegar is packed with health benefits and is an essential backup if you run out of fresh produce. And balsamic? That's a luxury item that's already seeing price jumps thanks to limited production in Italy due to climate disruptions. If you wait too long, you might end up paying double or worse, not finding any at all. Just last year, a major supply chain delay caused shortages in multiple grocery stores, and when it restocked, prices had surged by 40%. That's why you need to grab at least a few large bottles now. Store them in a cool, dark place, and they'll last indefinitely. Now let's get into something that might catch you off guard. Baking soda and cornstarch. These are two pantry staples most people take for granted, but they're becoming essential survival items. Here's the reality. Baking soda is not just for baking. It's a natural deodorizer, a toothpaste substitute, a cleaning agent, and even a fire extinguisher in a pinch. Cornstarch? It's a thickening agent, a baby powder alternative, and a key ingredient in DIY personal care products. Here's where it gets crazy. Both of these are already seeing supply disruptions. The chemical industry that produces baking soda is facing rising raw material costs, and corn production in the US took a major hit last year. That's why some brands are quietly shrinking package sizes while keeping prices the same. You might not notice it now, but in a few months, you'll realize you're getting less for more money. The good news? Both baking soda and cornstarch have an indefinite shelf life if stored properly. That means you can stock up now and not worry about expiration dates. A few extra boxes today could save you a huge headache later. Keep them sealed in airtight containers to prevent moisture absorption, and you'll be set for years. Now, let's talk about instant mashed potatoes. Yeah, I know. This isn't exactly gourmet food, but hear me out. Potatoes are one of the most reliable, calorie-dense staples out there, but fresh potatoes, they have a limited shelf life. Instant mashed potatoes, on the other hand, can last up to 10 years when stored properly, and they take up way less space. But here's why you need to pay attention. Potato shortages are already happening. Last year, flooding and droughts wiped out major crops, and the ripple effect is still being felt. That means prices are climbing, and processed potato products are going to be the next to see price hikes. Here's a little-known fact. Store-brand instant potatoes are often made in the same factories as name-brand versions. You're literally paying more for the same product with a different label. So don't get caught up in branding. Grab the cheapest version you can find and get at least a few months' supply per person. And now let's talk about one of the most overlooked food security items, yeast. If you were around for the 2020 baking boom, you remember what happened. Yeast vanished from shelves overnight. People suddenly realized that if you have flour and yeast, you can make your own bread, and that kind of self-sufficiency became a necessity. Here's the problem. Yeast prices have quietly climbed by 25% in the last year. And while supply isn't wiped out yet, demand is still higher than it's ever been. If another food crisis hits, yeast will be one of the first things to disappear. The good news? You can store yeast for years if you freeze it. A vacuum-sealed bag of dry yeast can last 5 years in the freezer, and even longer if you store it with oxygen absorbers. If you don't have freezer space, a cool, dry pantry works too. Just use it within a year. Here's the smart move. Buy a bulk pack now while prices are stable. It's cheap, it lasts forever, and if things get bad, you'll be able to bake your own bread while everyone else is scrambling. But let's get real. Having food is one thing, but staying healthy while food shortages happen is a whole other challenge. That's why we need to talk about multivitamins and supplements. People underestimate this, but when access to fresh food becomes unpredictable, vitamins become critical. Recent reports from Harvard Medical School show that certain vitamin combinations can help your body adapt better to dietary changes. Vitamin D3 with K2, vitamin C with zinc, and a solid B complex are at the top of their recommendations for maintaining immunity and energy levels during stressful times. Here's the part that no one's talking about. Global supplement shortages are coming. The raw materials used to produce vitamins come from a handful of major suppliers, and those supply chains have been under pressure since early 2024. That means prices are about to jump, again. The best part? Sealed vitamins last years beyond their printed expiration dates. As long as you store them in a cool, dry place with a silica gel packet, they'll maintain their potency well beyond what the bottle says. So, here's the play. Grab at least a 6-month supply now. Because when fresh produce becomes hard to find or too expensive to afford, your health shouldn't take a hit. Now, before we move on, let's take a step back. You don't need to buy everything at once, but what you do need to do is stay ahead of the curve. Prices aren't just rising, they're shifting faster than most people realize. And when that happens, the people who prepared early, they win. Coming up next, I'm going to break down one everyday product that's already being pulled in some stores. You might not think it's a big deal now, but once it's gone, you'll wish you had stocked up. Let's get into it. Let's talk about toilet paper and paper goods because if history has taught us anything, It's that when supply chains falter, these are the first things people panic by. You remember 2020, the aisles wiped clean, prices skyrocketing, people hoarding packs like their lives depended on it. Well, here's the thing. We're already seeing signs that it could happen again. The cost of raw materials used to make paper products has surged, and manufacturers are quietly making changes, shrinking sheet counts, thinning out quality, and increasing prices while hoping you won't notice. But here's what really caught my attention. Industry insiders are predicting an 8 to 12% price increase across all paper goods by March 2025. That means you need to act now. This isn't just about toilet paper. Paper towels, napkins, tissues, anything made from wood pulp, is about to cost you more. Some major retailers have already started limiting how much you can buy in a single trip, which means the shortages are creeping in. And let me tell you a game-changing trick most people don't know. Vacuum sealing your paper products. It reduces storage space by nearly half and keeps everything pristine, no dust, no moisture. Now let's talk about soap and sanitizers. At first glance, you might think these are low priority, but consider this. What happens when stores run out and you can't just grab more? The latest CDC guidelines have revealed some shocking truths about sanitizers. Not all of them are effective. You need one with at least 60% alcohol for it to work properly. But here's where things get interesting. Supply chain reports are showing ethanol shortages, and that means hand sanitizer is about to become harder to find and more expensive. But here's where most people go wrong. They only stockpile liquid soap. Liquid is great, but it takes up space, it's heavy, and if you run out, it's gone. The smarter move? Bar soap. It lasts longer, it's easier to store, and some types, like Castile soap, can be used for everything from hand washing to dishes to laundry. And here's a little-known fact. During past shortages, bar soap prices remained stable while you wait until the price hikes hit before stocking up. Get your supply now while it's still affordable. Another overlooked essential, dilutable cleaning concentrates. One bottle can replace up to 16 gallons of cleaner, which is a massive money saver when disinfectant prices spike. It's not just about keeping your space clean, it's about having the ability to sanitize surfaces, wash dishes, and even do laundry when supplies get tight. And speaking of essentials that people underestimate, let's talk about water storage. If you think this isn't a concern, just look at what's happening in cities across the country. Aging water systems, boil advisories, contamination issues. We've already seen places go weeks without clean water. FEMA recommends 1 gallon per person per day, but that's the bare minimum. You need to think about drinking, cooking, hygiene, even pets. Here's what most people don't realize. Properly stored bottled water doesn't actually expire, but plastic degrades over time. That's why you should rotate your supply every 6 months and keep bottles away from direct sunlight and heat sources. And if you want an even better backup, gravity-fed water filtration systems. These can turn contaminated water into safe drinking water without electricity. When major storms or power outages hit, these filters become lifesavers. And they're already selling out in some areas because more people are waking up to how fragile our infrastructure really is. Now let's talk about something that hits close to home for a lot of people. Pet food and supplies. If you have a pet, you already know how expensive food has gotten. But here's what you might not know. Many premium brands are quietly reformulating their recipes to include cheaper ingredients because supply chains for meat and grain-based pet food are strained. That means your pet's usual food might not even be the same product in a few months. And in some cases, the nutritional quality is dropping. If you wait until shortages get worse, you'll be forced to switch brands suddenly, which can cause health issues for your pet. The solution? Stock up on your pet's food now and slowly introduce backup brands. If you can, look for freeze-dried or dehydrated pet food. It has a much longer shelf life and could be a game changer if supply chain disruptions continue. And don't forget about extra litter, waste bags, and medications. Those are the first things to disappear when panic buying starts. Now let's move on to batteries and emergency power. This isn't just about keeping your flashlight on during a blackout. The latest data shows that lithium battery production is struggling to keep up with demand, and prices have already increased by nearly 30% in the last year. But here's what most people don't realize. Batteries have a shelf life. If you're buying them one pack at a time, you're doing it wrong. The smart move? Bulk packs of lithium and alkaline batteries, stored properly, can last up to 10 years. And if you really want to be ahead of the game, invest in rechargeable batteries with a solar charger. Prices on these are actually low right now, but as power grid issues continue to make headlines, that's not going to last. Imagine an extended blackout with no way to recharge your essentials. This is one of those better safe than sorry stockpiles that people don't think about until it's too late. But let's take it a step further: first aid and medical supplies. People assume they'll always be able to run to the pharmacy, but that's not guaranteed. In a crisis, stores sell out fast, and certain medications become nearly impossible to find. You need to have a stocked first aid kit with more than just bandages and aspirin. Think about what you might actually need in an emergency: antiseptics, wound care, burn cream, electrolyte powders, cold medicine, allergy meds. Even something as simple as a lost filling or a toothache can become a major issue if you don't have dental emergency supplies. The Red Cross has updated their recommendations, and if you haven't refreshed your kit in a while, now is the time. And here's something that too many people forget: document backups. If you or your family rely on prescription medications, you need to have digital and physical copies of your prescriptions, medical records, and emergency contacts. A waterproof, fireproof document bag is one of the smartest things you can add to your emergency kit. Let's talk about an everyday essential that's already seeing quiet restrictions in some stores: salt. You might think salt is abundant, cheap, and always available, but here's what's happening behind the scenes. Global salt production has been impacted by extreme weather, mining disruptions, and transportation bottlenecks. And when that happens, prices creep up while supply dwindles. But here's the real reason you need to stock up now. Salt isn't just for seasoning food. It's a critical preservative, electrolyte replenisher, and even a bartering tool if things get worse. In some cultures, salt was literally used as currency. And if you look at what's happening in the supply chain, it's easy to see why. You're not just buying salt for cooking, you're buying it for curing meats, preserving food, and even water purification. And don't just grab the first salt you see on the shelf. Refined table salt with additives doesn't last as long as pure sea salt or pink Himalayan salt. The best part? It never expires. If you store it in an airtight container away from moisture, it will be just as good in 10, 20, even 50 years. People who overlook salt now will regret it later when prices spike or stores start limiting how much you can buy at once. And speaking of long-term essentials, let's talk about sugar. Here's something most people don't realize. Global sugar cane production has dropped 12% in the last year, and major food manufacturers are already looking for alternative sweeteners. But the issue isn't just supply, it's demand. As the cost of artificial sweeteners continues to climb, more companies are shifting back to real sugar, which is driving up prices even further. But here's the kicker: white sugar, when stored properly, never goes bad. You heard that right. Unlike many pantry staples, sugar doesn't spoil, mold, or lose its effectiveness over time. The key is keeping it completely dry and storing it in airtight containers to prevent hardening. And here's something most people don't think about. Brown sugar and powdered sugar have much shorter shelf lives. If you want the longest lasting option, stick to white granulated sugar. It can always be turned into powdered sugar in a blender, or mixed with molasses to make brown sugar when needed. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Alternative sweeteners are already climbing in price faster than regular sugar. If you use honey, maple syrup, or stevia, you need to be watching what's happening in the market. Honey production has been hit hard by declining bee populations, and the cost of pure maple syrup is already through the roof because of lower yields in Canada. These aren't just grocery items, they're investments. And now, let's get into one of the most overlooked survival essentials: cooking fats. You've seen what's happening with cooking oil prices, but most people don't realize that butter, lard, and shortening are just as crucial in a food crisis. Here's the reality: butter shortages are becoming more common, and it's one of the first things to disappear during supply chain disruptions. If you've ever tried to buy butter during a major storm or crisis, you know exactly what I mean. But here's what you might not know: you can store butter long-term without refrigeration. Canned butter, ghee, or clarified butter, and freeze-dried butter powder last for years without spoiling. And when grocery shelves go empty, you'll still be able to cook, bake, and get the fats your body needs. Shortening and lard? Same story. Most people ignore them because they think they're unhealthy, but they're actually some of the best long-term cooking fats you can buy. A sealed container of shortening can last 5 to 10 years on the shelf, and lard, if stored in a cool, dark place, can last even longer. And here's something most people don't realize. Fats are critical for survival. Your body needs them for energy, brain function, and vitamin absorption. If food shortages get worse, having a backup supply of cooking fats could be just as important as having grains and proteins. Now, let's talk about one of the most critical things people forget to stockpile: matches and fire starters. You might think, I have a lighter, I'm good. But here's what most people don't understand. Lighters run out of fuel, and in a prolonged emergency situation, you don't want to be scrambling to find a way to cook, stay warm, or start a fire when you need it most. Waterproof matches, stormproof lighters, magnesium fire starters, these are all things that can last for years and will be absolutely priceless if a disaster strikes. And here's something that even preppers overlook: fat wood. This naturally resin-rich wood is an incredible fire starter that burns hot and long, even when wet. People used to rely on it before modern fire starting methods, and in a true emergency, this stuff is gold. But let's get into something even more important: light and energy sources. Think about this. If the power grid goes down, what's your plan? Candles, flashlights, solar-powered lanterns? Most people have no idea how quickly they'd run out of light sources if an outage lasted more than a few days. That's why you need more than just a couple of candles in a drawer somewhere. Long-burning emergency candles, solar-powered lights, and crank-powered flashlights are the real solution. And here's what's happening right now. Battery prices are climbing, and supply chain issues with lithium production are already causing shortages in some rechargeable battery models. If you're not stocking up on energy sources now, you might find yourself paying double or struggling to find what you need when it really matters. Think about things like power banks for your phone, rechargeable lanterns, and even small solar panels that can keep your devices running when the grid is unreliable. These are investments in your security and independence. And speaking of security, let's talk about one of the biggest overlooked essentials: personal protection and self-defense items. If things get worse, whether it's rising crime, economic instability, or natural disasters, you want to be prepared, not panicked. This isn't about fear, it's about having the tools to protect yourself and your family if needed. But here's something most people forget. In a crisis, self-defense goes beyond weapons. Security cameras, motion sensor lights, reinforced locks, even something as simple as a loud personal alarm can make a huge difference. And here's the reality. Emergency response times are getting slower in some areas due to staffing shortages. That means having a plan for your own security is more important than ever. Now let's shift gears and talk about one of the most critical items you need for long-term preparedness: canned and freeze-dried proteins. You might think canned meat is just a backup option, but when you look at what's happening with global meat production, it becomes clear that this is a necessity, not a luxury. The poultry industry is still reeling from last year's bird flu outbreak, and beef prices are expected to jump another 15% due to feed shortages. The cost of raising livestock is skyrocketing, and that's trickling down into grocery store prices faster than most people realize. That means canned chicken, tuna, salmon, and even things like canned ham and Spam aren't just good for emergencies. They're essential stockpile items that could save you hundreds of dollars down the line. Here's where most people make a mistake. They only buy a few cans at a time. If you're serious about staying ahead of price hikes, you need to think in terms of months, not weeks. And don't forget about freeze-dried meat. It lasts up to 30 years, takes up less space, and provides a protein source that's just as good as fresh when rehydrated. If you see it on sale, grab it. In a prolonged crisis, protein shortages will be one of the biggest challenges people face. But protein isn't just about meat. Let's talk about nuts, seeds, and legumes, because these are another category that's quietly getting more expensive. California's almond production has been hit hard by drought, and peanut butter prices have already started climbing due to lower yields. And while most people focus on canned beans, dry beans are the smarter choice for long-term storage. Black beans, chickpeas, red lentils, these all have a shelf life of 25 years if stored properly. That means you're locking in today's prices for decades. And here's something to keep in mind. Nuts and seeds contain healthy fats that your body needs to function. Without them, you'll start feeling the effects of poor nutrition fast. If you can, vacuum seal raw almonds, walnuts, or sunflower seeds and store them in a cool, dark place. They'll last much longer this way, and you won't have to rely on whatever is left on store shelves when prices spike again. But what happens when you have the food but no way to cook it? This is where backup cooking methods become crucial. If you're relying on an electric stove or microwave, you're already at a disadvantage in a prolonged outage. You need an alternative. Camping stoves, propane burners, even simple rocket stoves that burn wood. These could be the difference between having a meal and watching your food supply go to waste. And if you're thinking, I'll just use my grill, consider this. During extended emergencies, propane and charcoal sell out fast. If you don't have backups now, you could be stuck with raw ingredients and no way to cook them. That's why having multiple options matters. A butane stove for quick meals, a solar oven for when fuel runs low, and even something as simple as a fireproof cooking grate for open flame cooking. It doesn't have to be complicated, but waiting until you need it is not a plan. And let's talk about something most people completely overlook: seasonings and spices. If you think cooking from your stockpile means eating bland, boring food, you're in for a rude awakening. Spices make all the difference, but here's the problem. Global spice production is already struggling. India's cardamom prices jumped nearly 90% last year, and vanilla? It's practically liquid gold at this point. This isn't just about taste, it's about making your food stretch. The more flavorful your meals are, the less you feel like you're eating the same thing over and over. Stockpile black pepper, cinnamon, garlic powder, turmeric, paprika, spices that add depth to meals and have long shelf lives. And here's a tip from a professional chef. Buy whole spices instead of pre-ground. They last 3 to 4 times longer, and you can grind them as needed. And speaking of making food stretch, let's talk about vinegar and baking essentials. Vinegar is one of the most versatile items you can have in your pantry. It preserves food, cleans surfaces, and even extends the shelf life of produce when used properly. And with the recent surge in home canning and fermentation, demand for vinegar is higher than ever. And then there's flour. If you bake, you already know the price of wheat products is climbing, and lower yields mean it's not slowing down anytime soon. The best time to stock up on flour is now, before the next round of price hikes hits. But here's the mistake people make. They buy standard flour without thinking about storage. If you don't store it properly, it won't last more than 6 months before going stale or attracting pests. The solution? Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers or airtight containers in the freezer. And don't just buy all-purpose flour. Bread flour, whole wheat flour, and even gluten-free alternatives, like almond or coconut flour, are good backups. During the last major flour shortage, specialty flours disappeared first, so if you use them, stock up while you still can. And now, let's get into something most people completely forget until it's too late: medical and hygiene products. You can have all the food in the world, but if you get sick or can't maintain basic hygiene, you're in trouble. Antibiotic ointments, bandages, cold medicine, electrolyte powders. These are things you don't think about until you need them. And if you rely on daily medications, you need to have a backup supply. Pharmacies have already started experiencing delays on certain medications, and supply chain experts are warning that the trend is only getting worse. And then there's hygiene. Toothpaste, deodorant, feminine hygiene products, items that quietly disappear from store shelves when things get bad. And let's not forget about soap and shampoo. The mistake people make is assuming that these items will always be available, but just like with cleaning supplies in 2020, it only takes one disruption for them to become scarce. Everything we've talked about so far, these aren't panic buys, they're strategic investments in your future. Our prices aren't just creeping up, they're accelerating. And when supply chains break down, the people who prepared early won't have to scramble. If this video gave you the wake-up call you needed to get ahead of 2025's rising prices and looming shortages, go ahead and hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What's the first thing you're stocking up on? For me, it was coffee because, let's be real, I'm not facing a crisis without caffeine. And while you're here, tell me, what other preparedness topics do you want to see next? Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming. Next week, I'm exposing the sneaky tricks grocery stores use to make you spend more. And trust me, once you know them, you'll never shop the same way again. Stay ahead, stay sharp, and I'll catch you in the next one.